stopping us, we do the impossible.
All Elite Wrestling has defied expectations with its meteoric rise.
The scene has changed.
Record-high ratings, game-changing content, world-class roster.
The home of professional wrestling is All Elite Wrestling.
Pop culture infiltration.
Let's go!
And a highly entertaining product.
This crowd is going insane.
That draws the youngest skewing wrestling audience in all of sports.
AEW Dynamite!
AEW's mission is to make this the best time ever to be a professional wrestling fan.
Unbelievable!
For the first time in many years, AEW is providing an alternative to mainstream wrestling.
Oh my God!
With an incredible roster of talent that is injecting new spirit, freshness, and energy into the industry. AEW's flagship show, Dynamite, has quickly become the #1 new cable original series and the #1 cable program on Wednesday nights.
Boom! How about that?
On August 13th, the game changed yet again when AEW debuted its highly anticipated one-hour show, Rampage, on TNT, which has quickly become a top 5 show on cable television on Friday nights.
Oh!
Fueled by its widely passionate fan base, AEW Live Events has been on fire, with instant arena sellouts in the top U.S. markets.
Somebody at home just said, oh, I get it.
AEW has also reinvigorated the pay-per-view business with highly anticipated quarterly
For the
events.
love of God, it's Bryan Danielson!
Since the first event in May 2019, AEW has become the top-selling professional wrestling pay-per-view in the last 5 years.
I didn't expect to see that.
Sold in over 100 countries and available in 4 languages.
That was amazing!
AEW's digital media presence continues to explode. With a roster of more than 150 world-class male and female talent, AEW has the ability to reach over 75 million fans with one click of a button.
That's a statement.
By the end of 2021, AEW will have produced more than 300 hours of original programming
Holy smokes!
and continues to expand its global footprint with major international partners and streaming services.
I'm chanting, this is awesome! This is awesome!
With a commitment to a world-class wrestling product, a culture driven by diversity and inclusivity, and a passion for creativity, the only question that remains is, what's next for AEW? The possibilities are boundless.
Welcome to Monaco Streaming Film Festival's discussion on the present-day boom in pro wrestling. I'm Gavin Bridge, Senior Media Analyst at Variety's Variety Intelligence platform, and I'm joined today by All Elite Wrestling owner, General Manager, and Head of Creative, Tony Khan. Hello, Tony.
Hi, Gavin. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you as well. So for those who don't know, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how AEW came to be?
Sure. My family owns the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Fulham Football Club in London. And of course, the Jacksonville Jaguars in the NFL. My father bought that team about 10 years ago. And a few years ago, I realized that there was a great opportunity in professional wrestling because a lot of the top professional wrestlers were either out of contract or were going to be out of contract very soon. So in 2018, I put together a business plan. And on January 1st of 2019, at the start of the year, we launched AEW and put together plans to sign up a bunch of star wrestlers and launch a television show with Warner Media. That show, AEW Dynamite, launched 2 years ago last week. And in our 2 years, we've built a great audience. And since the pandemic, have seen a huge lift and are really at new highs in terms of a number of key business metrics, and have seen great growth in those 2 years, and started with a great roster and have built an even bigger, greater roster of stars, and have seen legitimately really exciting lifts in our business metrics since we strengthened our roster, which we could talk more about.
So you're coming off of a hot streak, but I think wrestling overall in general has been on a hot streak. Dynamite in particular has
two companies, right? I guess there's 2 wrestling companies that have really seen the lift from this, I think.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd say WWE and AEW. Yeah, like MLW did their Vice show the other week, but that didn't necessarily start amazingly, although fingers crossed that can keep growing. But you've seen, I'd say Dynamite has seen a fair increase in viewers over the last couple of like 6 or 7 weeks, and doing very well in the 18 to 49 demo, but also leading the night. And I think you'll find like 3 wrestling shows tend to lead their nights, at least at the moment. So what do you think is behind this like TV hot streak that's going on, both for you and the sport in general?
I think the rise of AEW has helped fuel competition. WWE was in a strong position already. They had great audience and good demographics and, a stronger roster, honestly, before AEW came along. And, in the last few years, the free agency that has come into pro wrestling since we launched AEW, and now more competition, more good matches on television, has led to more fans being interested, has brought fans back to professional wrestling. And there's a bigger audience for wrestling than there has been in a long time. And in terms of live attendance, merchandising, and now pay-per-view buys, we're at all-time highs. And we've built this great TV audience. And in a world where people talk about linear TV and the future of cable and satellite, the most important thing to me is just to maintain the number 1 position, or at least be in the top 5, top 10 shows, and maintain a chance to be at or around number 1 as much as we possibly can. And when we launched AEW Dynamite in October of 2019, we didn't hit number 1 right away, and it took a while for us to hit number 1. It wasn't until April 14th of 2021 that we finally reached that position. And since then, we've done it many times, and we're just coming off a streak where we have been the number 1 show on cable and satellite for 6 straight weeks on Wednesday night. And now with some sports coming on to cable, we've been time shifted to the weekend the next couple of weeks. So it'll be a great opportunity when we go back to Wednesdays to start that streak again and build a lot of buzz for our Wednesday show. We've also launched a second television show on Friday nights. Now, it took us 2 years for Dynamite to hit number 1 on the week, and it only took us 2 weeks for Rampage to do that. Our second episode has hit that. It's a challenge Friday nights at 10 o'clock to get live viewership. We've seen great audience, though, relative to the time slot, still being top in the slot. And, I really believe with our fan base, they follow us as long as we promote it and keep delivering great matches. They follow us practically wherever we go because they really love AEW. So within reason, I want to keep, finding ways to give them great content without oversaturating the marketplace also. So right now, I think we are in a sweet spot of the right amount of wrestling for everybody, that they seem to have found a good groove. And I've coined a phrase recently, WYW, watch your wrestling. And I just want people to find what they like, enjoy it. And for us, AEW gives 3 hours of great TV programming each week, with 2 hours Wednesday and 1 hour Friday. And our pay-per-view offerings, we put together quarterly pay-per-view offerings. And the numbers we've seen, no independent wrestling company that's come along in the last 20 plus years, really since the 90s, has hit the numbers we've hit. And it had really been a 1-horse race in terms of the TV and pay-per-view business for a long time, until AEW came along in terms of rights fees on television, which there's still a big gap. We have bigger rights fees by far than any wrestling company besides WWE, but I have to tip our hat to how great the rights fees and revenues of WWE are and the business they built. But it's also a business that's been built over 40 plus years, and was also a business that was purchased and then has been built up over those 40 plus years, as opposed to AEW, which is not a business I bought. It's a business we started from scratch. And so not just no other wrestling company that's come along in that time, but no other wrestling company, period. No matter how long they've been around, other than WWE, has done that since the 90s, which, to your point, was really the last wrestling boom, which is why we're here, I guess, talking about this wrestling boom. We've seen a lift in our pay-per-view numbers year over year. We have 4 quarterly events, and each one of them has been up from the year prior. So our Q2 and Q3 events, Double or Nothing and All Out, now we've presented 3 of those, and each of them has gone up year over year significantly. And the biggest lift yet was the one we got for the most recent All Out. We've seen a huge lift in our business metrics since CM Punk arrived in AEW. He's one of the great wrestling stars, and he brought a ton of fans with him. We had a huge lift for AEW Rampage when he came in, and that gave us a high mark for that show and helped us hit number 1 for a new show. very early in its launch. And he's continued to help lift the ratings in a very difficult time slot when he's been on. And he also, the pay-per-view, we sold well over 200,000 pay-per-views worldwide, which is, like I said, not just a record for AEW, but also far more than any other company has done since the 1990s, really, in the last boom of wrestling. And our SVOD subscriptions on Fight have more than doubled in just a couple months since CM Punk signed up, which is amazing because those subscriptions had been accumulating for almost 2 years before that.
You could say, it's the best any wrestling company other than WWE's done this millennium, which makes it sound even.
Yeah, millennium century, however you want to say it. Absolutely. I think that's then you might say I'm the Millennium Man, but the Millennium Man is Sid Vicious as wrestling.
I won't be in a room with use of scissors, but if that's the case.
That's very obscure for the Monaco film audience. But nevertheless, wrestling obscure references aside, we have a great chance here to build off this and keep gaining new fans. And one of the key things I think I've tried to do with AEW is hold back a lot. When you're in a position with a lot of talent and you can unload and do big matches, I think it's very tempting to just like unload the clip and start putting hot big matches out there. And I am doing that, but I'm not going to use them all up in 1 week or 2 weeks and, burn through all of the great stories that I think could last for years here. And so I am trying to be methodical in terms of, not killing the golden goose, because the golden goose is fresh matches and exciting matches. And we have years worth of them. And that's what I'm really excited about, because I think WCW built one of the great rosters ever in wrestling, and they were competing head to head with the WWF in the 90s. And I thought one of the mistakes they made was they had so many exciting matches potentially in WCW. And it was like week after week after week, they burned through them. But not only did they burn through them, but they were like very unsatisfying conclusions. A lot of them ended in a disqualification or something that really wouldn't make me that hungry to watch the rematch. Despite all of this, I can talk about, with the benefit of hindsight, about business mistakes WCW made. They also rose to incredible heights and prove that it's possible for a wrestling company to do this, but also there's a lot to learn from their success. And they were not afraid of the competition and did not shy away from the competition and really encouraged it. And they found a fan base of people that liked their product better, at least for a long time. And I think that's important.
So you have both a long-term strategy looking forward to keep the product enticing and to keep drawing in audiences, but an eye on history to make sure that you don't make the same mistakes of the past, but you look at the successes of the past to build upon.
Exactly. I think that's the key. And for me, we have a great roster of wrestlers, and that is the thing the fans care most about, is the talent, the star power. And now there really is great competition, because when we started AEW, there was no question we didn't have the greatest roster of star power, but we had exciting young wrestlers and a show people really wanted to see. And it's kind of a chicken or the egg. There's no way I could have launched with the roster of stars I have, because a lot of them, for some of them, were not available or out of contract when we launched. And others, really wanted to see how this went before they would commit to it, and had to kind of see some proof of concept before signing up to be effectively a guinea pig in a new wrestling company. So there was clearly a ton of interest in AEW when we launched, and there has continued to be. And if I sometimes wonder if I could have launched with all the star power I have now, there was clearly great demand for it and people wanted to see it, but it wasn't possible then. And now it actually is possible. So I think it's building it up. And for people who liked AEW from the beginning, we've managed to maintain a big audience from year one, but we've also brought in a lot of new fans in the last couple of years. And a lot of that has come, I think, with free agency and bringing in top stars, whether it was Sting who's an established wrestler for decades, CM Punk, and now Bryan Danielson and Adam Cole. We've seen another lift from them. Our women's division has gotten a lot stronger since we launched, and now can do stronger ratings because we have more depth and more female stars. People are excited to see, adding people like Thunder Rosa, who was a top independent wrestler, and Ruby Soho, who had been a star in WWE and the independents before that. So, yeah, absolutely. I think star power in wrestling is paramount, is key. And then, creatively making sure to utilize those people in exciting ways and treating the fans with respect by giving them satisfying conclusions and not falsely advertising matches is really important to me too.
So that's actually a interesting way, because you just mentioned fans, and I want to touch on something there, because there is, in the spirit of the boom and competition, if you monitor any conversation about wrestling online, it doesn't matter what the source is. It could be a news site, it could be Twitter, it could be the comments on YouTube. There seems to be rampant tribalism going on, and I'm not sure if that's
about that. There's nothing new about that. It's just it's more widespread than it used to be. But even in the last wrestling boom online, there was a great amount of this. It was just the medium was very different. There were less people. There were less people in the chat rooms, the forums. This is all happening on dial-up internet for the most part, and there was a huge amount of tribalism back then. And I was a part of it. And now I see it not from the other side, but there's just the battlefield is much larger, and there are much more fans, much bigger of a fan base online talking about these events, talking about AEW and WWE compared to when I was a kid. And, now if the three companies people probably talk about the most are, WWE, AEW, and New Japan, I would say when I was a kid, it was the WWF, WCW, and ECW. And New Japan was a company that had worked with WCW a lot, but they hadn't necessarily built as much of a reputation in America, where I think they could stake the claim of being the number 3 company in America legitimately. So that's pretty interesting. And the battlefield on television is very different. There may not be as many linear TV viewers as there were, which is kind of misleading to people, I think, because then they think the wrestling boom isn't real. But the pay-per-views show that it's real, and really the TV revenues are what make it real, because the TV rights fees are much higher than they ever were. And that's what got me into the wrestling business, is the TV rights fees. The reason I plopped down millions and millions of dollars to sign up wrestlers and build this business plan was because TV rights fees justified it. And if we could build a hit TV show, which we did, we could command big rights fees to build a company around. So that was the business model. We signed a $175 million 4-year extension. That's really been one of the key lifeblood revenue streams of this company. And particularly when live event touring revenue dissipated through the pandemic, that was our key revenue source. We were able to run profitable tapings actually through the pandemic by taping a bunch of shows on a closed set and bringing in a crew of wrestlers and filming in a closed set. So in a bubble. And that also, by commanding the rights fees and trying to keep the costs down, that allowed us to run a profitable show through the pandemic, which was important and allowed me to keep the business strong enough that I didn't do what my competition did, which is mass layoffs, laying off dozens and dozens and dozens of people, which I've yet to do. And I eventually there may come a time to cut some costs and do it, but I definitely didn't think in the middle of the global pandemic, or even in the wake of the global pandemic, when work is hard to come by, it was not the time to do it. And even though it hurt the bottom line of the company to keep some people on who weren't even coming to the shows, who were staying home because they were worried about COVID. I kept all these people on, and we weren't getting any revenue out of them, but it wasn't, as a human being, the right thing to do. So there was a time where I was making human choices instead of business choices, knowing that eventually maybe there will come a time to make these business choices, but the pandemic was not the time. I just felt like I needed to support the people. We did have a skeleton crew of people that were coming to the shows that kept us going. And I look back very fondly at those shows, actually. They were hard to put together, and for what they were, they're pretty good.
Well, you make a very good point about the rights fees being the hidden metric really for the boom in pro wrestling, because it's the most valuable time ever. And you make a good.
I know they're what started it, because for me, that's the conversation that started AEW. Was I went up to the president of TNT and TBS and talked to him about rights fees he was potentially looking at spending if he had bid on a WWE TV package, and he wouldn't have gotten it anyway, because I think he was prepared to spend maybe over 150 million. He wasn't prepared to spend the 205 million it ended up being. And furthermore, it made more sense what I was saying to him, which was, if that's the case, if you're really prepared to spend that kind of money, I think it would make more sense for us to talk and have a conversation you never dreamed we were going to have. But I think, what we should do is sit down and talk about, if I start a wrestling company and we could build a startup and you could put a lot less money into it and get a lot more value, which is true. And I've delivered that value.
Well, actually, is a good segue here to talk about the renewed distribution deal that you have, which increased the amount of time for Dynamite on the contract to Warner Media. You also added a new show, 4 quarterly TV specials as well. What is it about AEW that I guess TBS and TNT has made them so pleased with the content that's available to them from AEW?
The performance of AEW. I think if you look in the last 4 years, I'm sorry. If you look at the last 2 years of the shows that TNT and TBS have launched, I believe you could argue that the 4 most successful shows they've launched have been Dynamite, Rampage, Roads to the Top, and Go Big Show. And all of those shows have AEW involvement. Of course, AEW, Dynamite, and Rampage have both ranked at number 1 in their time slot, and both consistently have performed very high for them, and have been not just number 1 in the time slot, number 1 for the entire day that they're on, both shows. So those, I think, have been their 2 number 1 shows they've launched. And then as far as other shows that have finished in the top 15, top 20 consistently, Roads to the Top and Go Big Show are the other ones. I don't know if they've launched any other shows that have done that well. So I think it's by our really strong performance. Like, I would argue that we've been their best performer. So that's why they want more of us.
It definitely...
It's a good thing. I mean, it's a great network with lots of great shows, but by us being some of their best programming, I think that's why they've come back to us to do more stuff. And it's great. I love being a great performer for them.
Well, it does lend itself. I think the nature of pro wrestling and fandom that's entailed with it does lend itself to franchise spin-offs. You have to think outside the box in sort of referring to wrestling as a franchise in a way. But you do see it with NBCU as well. They've managed to create a very good system spinning off of like their investment in WWE. I know Fox Sports tried it as well with Backstage. Like it definitely has potential, and you're seeing.
I didn't agree with the Backstage at all. I didn't think that was a good format, and I actually had been pitched to do a format like that for AEW, and I refused, because I don't think wrestling fans wanted to see that format. I think wrestling fans, when they tune in to watch the wrestling show, they want to watch the wrestlers wrestle, and Backstage to me should be like a lower budget streaming type show. I don't know if it had the legs to carry as a TV show, even though the people involved with it were awesome. And a lot of them work for me now, and they're huge stars. But like, I want to watch CM Punk wrestle. I want to watch Christian Cage wrestle. And to me, that is the bread and butter. And I think it's like, I love watching those guys talk about wrestling. Don't get me wrong. I think that would be a kick-ass streaming show. I don't know if I would build one of my TV franchises around guys talking about wrestling.
I can see why
at least not in the context of analyzing it, breaking it down. Like, if I want to watch people talk about wrestling, they should be talking about wrestling each other.
Yeah. No, I can see though probably the point of view from
it was literally for Rampage. It was like part of the format I turned down that I wouldn't do. Like, honestly,
they have that studio space, right? Like I know, because they create NBA TV, so it was probably like
it was asked about, like, would you do this as this third hour or as part of the third hour? And I said no. It's going to be wrestling, and I have a different format for it, and that's where like the market. We have almost like we're doing right now, right, Gavin? Like, if we were on Rampage, there would be a moderator between us to keep us separated, but we have added something to the show that is a new format that I kind of wanted to put in, where there is that component, that talk show component, like people talking to each other before they wrestle. But it would be like us right now, but instead of having this very friendly, productive conversation about business and metrics, it would be like if I was telling, well, we're about to go to the ring in about 30 seconds, Gavin, and I'm going to tear your head off. Like, I've really been looking forward to this. And there's only about 15 more seconds. And then of course the announcer would say, well, that's time. That's enough talk. It's time for the main event. And we'd go out and do it. That is a little bit of a twist on the format and the talk presentation, but it's not the idea of like, well, let's look back at the week in wrestling and have a cup of coffee together, which I think is not a good format for a TV show.
So one other thing that you touched upon before when we spoke about the tribalism is the role of the internet, and how the internet has obviously created so many paradigm shifts in the last 20 years for entertainment. One thing I said in my recent analysis of AEW for VIP was that you guys were lacking streaming service options, but I see recently you've made some sort of announcement suggesting that something may be happening soon.
I haven't made an announcement. I got asked a question at Barstool, which is we could do a poll show about Barstool and what a fascinating business model it is and what a fascinating business it is. They asked me about it, and there is great demand for it, and I'm excited to talk more about it because we're building every week a great library of content. It gets better and better, and we can also provide more new content. So I'm excited to tell people about that, but it's still something we're working on.
Okay, I see. So no touching on my favorite question for you then about Fast.
Well, Fast is another subject, okay? Free ads, that's a different subject. Now that could be, we have a lot of content that could be fast content that isn't the premium content. I'm never going to put the $50 pay-per-views or every episode of Dynamite up on Fast for free ad-supported streaming. It's just not going to make sense. But there may be some of our programming, like Dark or things like that which are our developmental shows, or even some of these things we're talking about, like conversational shows. That's great for Fast. Like, I would much rather have a couple people have a cup of coffee and have a wrestling conversation on Fast. It feels like a much more appropriate place for people to sit down and watch that than on network television.
Actually, so let me ask you it will sound obscure, but this will lead to something. Did you ever go on the FX Simpsons app when it was running?
It's a fascinating question. No, I didn't.
So if you went on that, they had, after they bought the syndicated rights to The Simpsons, they had a system where they had about 10 or 12 different themed program channels with just full episodes of The Simpsons, but by theme. And it would change. It looked like a TV grid, and it was only available if you had a TV subscription. So one of the things I think that we're definitely seeing underutilized right now is the application of linear streaming channels, but within subscription streaming. So it's basically Fast, right? But it's included within the premium package. That I think for a sport or a content manufacturer like yourself could be a very good premium add-on to include, because you just the beauty to some of these things is you don't have to look for something to watch, right? You just tune in. If you had like 5 or 6 different themed channels,
I talk about this all the time. The randomness of the randomness of the content selection and the scheduling is definitely one of the perks of when you build a good library, is that like you can create those channels, create themed content. And like I said, both the randomness and the quirkiness of the way the content is packaged and scheduled, I think is one of the advantages of doing that and creating those channels.
It's definitely something I think is missing from sports. Like if you look at, just to take it a wider discussion very quickly, if you look at like the NFL channel or the MLB channel, it's mostly reruns of random games. And you think like there's such a lot of content there. You could do like the best feuds, the best clashes of like each season, the best goals, the best.
The NFL Network, we do a great job of that. I have to say, the NFL Network, for example, we do have a lot of like those special, like the 100 greatest catches, the 100 greatest wide receivers.
Is that more on the streaming one, or is that on the regular cable network?
On the linear network? But I think those are. I mean, I still think, you know, to your point, that's a good question. But I believe on the linear network, like there's a lot of like the top 10 greatest plays, the top 10 greatest New York Giants. So now, as far as putting all that content and creating the premium streaming service, it's something I actually need to look into and talk to Brian Roloff about, because it's good points. And you know, the way the content is being consumed is constantly changing, and the NFL is constantly innovating and leading the way in that area. And you know, the streaming audience of the NFL is massive and continues to grow every year, which is part of why the NFL audience is growing when everything else is declining.
So I think we'll have time for one more.
Wrestling is also growing.
Well, this is the final question, really, that I was going to put to you here, is just not necessarily where do you see wrestling going, but I guess the stickiness of wrestling. Because I've been doing a lot of analysis in the last couple of days, really, on how big cable shows in general have just shed audience in the last 5 years, right? And long term, any show obviously isn't at the level it was, but you look at the big dramas that are out there. They've gone from pulling in, like The Walking Dead was pulling in average, say, like 12, 14 million. It's now pulling in 2 million in a number of years. Wrestling has dropped, but it has remained somewhat sticky. For you in particular, Dynamite is up. Now, some shows are up. It's very rare to find. You're in the company of 90 Day Fiancé in terms of shows that are increasing during this time period. But it's just a very fascinating thing to see. So do you think that do you think wrestling can keep this stickiness going?
Yeah, I do. There are so many of us, like you, Gavin, myself, and millions of people around the world who have the bug, and it's never going away. We're never going to stop watching wrestling. We move on. It moves out of your life. You stop thinking about it every day for a week, a month, maybe even a year. But in all seriousness, like, we never give it up. We always check back in on it. We can't help it. And the thing about AEW that TNT, the TBS, the network people, I tried to explain to them, and I think now you can kind of get the feel and see it. When you're starting a wrestling company, it's all perception, and people have to perceive it as being a big company and a big thing. And now AEW is seen in a light that no other wrestling company has been seen in since WCW. Is okay, there's actually another big corporate entity, a big company that can sustain. It's like a major thing. There have been other great wrestling companies that have come along other than WWE and AEW in the last few decades that have had great matches, but they did it in very small gyms, low production values. Even when they had a big crowd, it was maybe 1,500 people, 2,000 people, as opposed to AEW, where our big crowds are 20,000, 15,000. And so to me, I think, yes, now wrestling can sustain this, and the audiences may change, the profiles of the audience will change, but there's millions of wrestling fans around the world, and we're never giving up on it.
So the boom is here to stay.
And I know there's two big wrestling companies that aren't going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, it's probably the best time in at least 21, 22 years to be a fan, for sure. And yeah, I'm glad to hear that what we've seen as the uptick of a boom sounds like it's going to be continuing. I think so. It's a great time to be a wrestling fan. I'm excited to be a wrestling promoter. Well, with that, I will wrap this one up. But thank you so much for your time, Tony, and look forward to hopefully discussing this with you again in the future. I can't wait. I'm excited. Hopefully next year.